Hi, and welcome back to Military Law Talks. So, today we're going to talk about accountability. Is accountability coming, specifically for the senior leaders who are involved in the botched Afghanistan withdrawal? And if you're like me, maybe this hits a little bit too close to home. So, I served in Afghanistan in 2013, and in a word, the withdrawal was devastating. I remember watching it on TV. I remember crying at work and being really, really upset about really kind of felt like my service was wasted. And yeah, I think a lot of us shared that sentiment at that time. And so today we're going to talk about the one military officer who was actually got in trouble for what happened with Afghanistan. And it had nothing to do with his role. He had played zero role in the withdrawal of Afghanistan. It had everything to do with his speech. And this video really adds and builds on the previous videos that I did in the last couple of days. And I will put those links to those videos below. So, in a video 2 days ago, I explained Article 88 of the UCMJ. And Article 88 of the UCMJ prohibits contempt towards officials. So, any commissioned officer in the military who uses contemptuous words against the president, the vice president, Congress, secretary of defense, secretary of any military department, secretary of homeland security, or any governor or state legislature can be punished by a court martial, so by our separate military justice system. And then in the next video, I talked about Parker versus Levy, which was a Vietnam era case where a military officer was charged and ultimately convicted and imprisoned for his speech. And this officer, a little different, he gave very anti-war, anti-Vietnam War speech, specifically to junior enlisted soldiers. And so he wasn't charged under Article 88. He was charged under Article 134 and 133, which I detail in that video, links below. But today we're going to talk about an officer who was charged with an Article 88 violation. And so before we get to that, let's kind of think back to what happened. So remember August, September 2021, we were withdrawing from Afghanistan after 20 years of war. And originally, the Trump administration had negotiated a deal for the withdrawal. However, after the change in administrations, after the 2020 election, it was the Biden administration who was actually overseeing the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the Biden administration essentially sped up the timeline for withdrawal and essentially, from what we know about it, left Department of State in lead of the withdrawal instead of the Department of Defense. And it was a hasty, kind of messy withdrawal. Lots of equipment was left. And unfortunately, lives were lost right at the end. So there were 13 fallen who were killed right in the last couple of days of Afghanistan, mostly Marines. I'm going to show an image of them. So, unfortunately, these fallen heroes were involved in a suicide bombing at Abbey Gate. Then, after that occurred, the military took some retaliatory action against the quote unquote terrorist who planned this suicide bomb attack. And then it later came out that actually that wasn't who the military attacked. It ended up being an aid worker and his family, and even 7 children were killed. I believe 15 people were killed, and 7 of them were children. And there was no accountability. There was no one was fired over it. Nothing ever happened to anyone over all of this. And I'm going to play a clip from the testimony of the commandant in the Marine Corps at the time, so General Mackenzie. He testified in front of Congress. I'm going to play a short little clip from that. So let me share my screen.
I'd like to talk a little bit now about Abbey Gate. It was a tragic event, one of many that have occurred over our 20-year engagement in Afghanistan. It remains my opinion that if there is culpability in this attack, it lies in policy decisions that created the environment of August 2021 in Kabul. Culpability and responsibility do not lie with the troops on the ground who 8 U.S. maneuver battalions.
Okay, so that just repeats. And so essentially, the DOD blamed Department of State blamed DOD, fingers kind of pointed anywhere at each other. And I'm going to read a portion from Crisis of Command. So this is, I'm going to make myself a little bigger. Maybe not. All right. So Crisis of Command by Stuart Scheller. So this is the book I'm going to cover today. And that he details a bit from that exchange from General Mackenzie when he was testifying in front of Congress. And so there was a question from a Democrat from Massachusetts, Representative Seth Moulton, probably butchering that. General Mackenzie, you went from 2,500 troops in Afghanistan in April to 650 in July, and then turned around and put 5,000 back into Kabul. You've said repeatedly that you personally believe that the Afghan government would fall if we didn't maintain a certain number of troops in the country. So why didn't you plan for an evacuation and leave enough troops on the ground to conduct it? And that's a question I feel like everyone was asking in the wake of what happened. A child would know, take all the civilians out first, leave the military last. And so he goes on and he says, let's be very clear. The evacuation has to be ordered by the Department of State. The drawdown on forces was ordered by the president in April and completed in July. And the non-combat evacuation operation is a separate mission. And that wasn't completely under the control of the Department of Defense. That was General Mackenzie's answer. And then the follow-up was, so you're going to fall back on the bureaucracy, the divide between the Department of Defense and state. That's the reason you had to pull back all those troops and then put more back in. And so, so that's playing out in the media, that's going on. And like I said, no one was ever held accountable. No senior leader, no one was ever even fired or demoted. And so Lieutenant Colonel Schaller, who wrote this book, started posting videos on social media. And the first video that he posted was while he was in uniform, he was a battalion commander in the Marines, and while he was in his office. So I'm going to play just a portion of that clip, and then I will link it below as well. All right.
People are upset because their senior leaders let them down, and none of them are raising their hands and accepting accountability or saying, we messed this up. If an 05 battalion commander has the simplest live fire incident EO complaint, boom, fired. But we have a Secretary of Defense that testified to Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Force could withstand the Taliban advance. We have chairmen of Joint Chiefs, who the commandant is a member of that, who's supposed to advise on military policy. We have a Marine combatant commander. All of these people are supposed to advise. And I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone? Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up? I've got battalion commander friends right now that are posting similar things, and they're saying, wondering if all the lives were lost and if it was in vain, all those people that we've lost over the last 20 years. And he goes on to say that we're all part of a chain. While every link may not be tested, the strength of the chain is only as strong as each link, and you got to be, good link, something like that. And what I'll say is, from my position, potentially all those people did die in vain if we don't have senior leaders that own up and raise their hand and say, we did not do this well in the end. Without that, we just keep repeating the same mistakes. This amalgamation of the economic / corporate / political / higher military ranks are not holding up their end of the bargain. I want to say this very strongly. I have been fighting for 17 years. I am willing to throw it all away to say to my senior leaders, I demand accountability.
All right. Let me just take this off. Okay, so that was a video that was posted to social media. So I think it was originally posted to Facebook. And I remember when this all was happening, I think he spoke for a lot of us in demanding accountability, but he really did put his career on the line. So he was relieved from battalion command, I think the next day. He was put under investigation, and then later, so he was told not to post anymore on social media. He was continuing to post on social media. He made a few more videos. And eventually he was actually thrown in pretrial confinement, which I remember thinking at the time, I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen an officer put in pretrial confinement. Personally, when I was a prosecutor, I had a very violent offender. He was ultimately convicted of domestic violence and rape. And I couldn't get pretrial confinement for him. And so, I mean, he got like 27 years eventually when he was convicted. But Stuart Scheller was just posting stuff on social media. He was speaking. So he was jailed. He was put in pretrial confinement for his speech, that he was like continuing to speak out, even though he was told not to. And so in his book, like I said, I recommend it. It's a little hard. I can't get in the camera. There we go. All right. So it's a good book. I think it's important to read. He's going to be a part of the Trump administration. And so I've made it kind of a mission of mine to read a lot of the books of the people who are part of the new administration to just get an understanding. And it details everything that happened from that first video that I just showed all the way to post court-martial. And it also explains his thought process. So it was really interesting to kind of like hear and think about what he was thinking at the time, what he went through, the impact on his family. But it also detailed his career, his background. So it was really interesting to hear that. And I basically read it in a day. Well, I listened to it. I listened to the audiobook, and he did do the audiobook. So it was cool to hear it in his own voice. I'm going to read a portion from the book after. I'm going to show the charge sheet first. So let's take a look at this charge sheet. Okay, here is the charge sheet. So this is what it looks like when we in the military bring charges against a military member under the UCMJ. And so they all look the same. So even though this is a Marine Corps, it looks absolutely the same as all the other branches. And so this is like the civilian version of this would be like an indictment. So we actually don't have, in the military, there's no grand jury requirement. So that's actually in the Constitution, that a grand jury is not required for cases brought under the military justice system. And so this is how we initiate the charges, kind of the indictment. So these are the charges. So these are just his personal information. And then it says that he was nature of restraint, so that he was in pretrial confinement. So he was in pretrial confinement from September 27th through October 5th. So the reason they crossed out present is because when they first preferred the charges, that's the language that the UCMJ uses. When they first brought the charges, he was currently in confinement, and then they pen and inked the end date of his confinement. And I believe that that's also the date he pled guilty. So he eventually pled guilty to the whole sheet, to all the charges. And so if you look, his first charge is violation of Article 88. So like I said, I did the video on Article 88. And so it says that he, in a contemptuous manner, which the video we watched, so you can be the judge, used orally and publicly, right? So he posted this to social media, words against the Secretary of Defense. And then these are the words. We have a Secretary of Defense, we heard him say it, that testified to Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Forces could withstand the Taliban advance. Did you throw your rank on the table and say that's a bad idea to abandon? We watched the video, a strategic airbase before we evacuate everyone. When you didn't think to do that, did you raise your hand and say, we completely messed this up? Potentially all these people did die in vain if we don't have senior leaders that own up and raise their hand and say that we did not do this well in the end. And so he was being charged for his speech, just like I explained in the other video. And then there were other charges. So disrespect towards a superior commissioned officer. Again, like I explained in an earlier video, these are all military specific crimes, right? We're not going to find any similar version of this crime in a state or federal criminal code. It's specific to the military because of our unique rank structure. All right. And then the only thing that looks kind of weird on this is that the corporal is like the name of the accuser. It's usually like the company commander, at least that's what we do in the military, who's the accuser. But anyone under the UCMJ can bring charges. And actually, Stuart Scheller talks about this in his book. He drafted charges himself, and he wanted to bring charges against one of his senior leaders, I believe the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General McKenzie, the one that we watched the video of him testifying in Congress. And then these are it. So it was referred. So that's the second step of this process. So we prefer charges. That means we bring the charges and then referred to a court-martial. So this is all a commander's process. So Major General Alford, which was his senior commanding officer at the installation he was at, he's the one who referred the charges to a court-martial. So he's the commanding general of Camp Lejeune at the time. And then it doesn't say, it was referred to a special court-martial. And so we'll talk about that. So there's 3 levels of court-martial that the military justice system has. And the special court-martial is essentially kind of our misdemeanor courts. And so it has jurisdictional limits of the court. And it's basically our misdemeanor. And I remember when this case was happening and I was like, why? I've never seen an officer get referred to anything other than a general court-martial, which is our felony level court-martial. So if you get convicted at a general court-martial, it is a federal felony level offense. Okay, so let's continue. So disrespect. And I want to point out General Alford that he's calling out. So he was the one who referred the charges. So keep that in mind. So he is essentially the victim, disrespect towards Major General Alford, the victim in this charge. Disrespect, 90, violating of willful disobedience of a superior commissioned officer, that he was told not to post anything on social media and he continued to post things. Dereliction of duty, failure to obey an order, So it says that he was alleged to have solicited funds while on social media in a video, and then other charges, conduct unbecoming, and several specifications. Those are individual acts of that same charge, conduct unbecoming. And they're all about his social media post, in a written social media post, in a video post, in a written social media post, social media post, that he stated these things over several time periods. And to me, it kind of just looks like they're like throwing everything. They're charging absolutely everything that they can. But like I said, he ended up pleading guilty. He had a civilian defense counsel, so military members get free defense counsels, but they can pay for at their own expense a military or a civilian defense counsel if they want. They can hire, and he hired his own civilian counsel, and they worked out a deal. Essentially, he pled guilty to the charges. And in exchange, I think it was for a referral at that summary court-martial, because it was limited in what his punishment could be. Obviously, he would get credit for his pretrial confinement time, but he ended up not getting any additional jail time, just the time that he already served. So I'm going to read a section from his book talking about his court-martial. So the judge, Colonel Hines, was a fair arbiter. So remember, in the military justice system, all the players are military members. So even the judges, they're senior judge advocates, they're lawyers in the military. They're usually very senior colonels, sometimes 05s, lieutenant colonels. And, but they've had generally lots of military justice experience before getting appointed to a judge job. So it says, the judge, Colonel Hines, was a fair arbiter. I was fortunate to have him look at all the facts of the case. It appeared to me that he did not want me to plead guilty. He stated that in his over 30 years as a JAG officer, he, quote, had never seen someone put in pretrial confinement for these types of charges. And I totally can echo that. And I remember when this happened, and I talked to several of my friends, and none of us could ever think of any type of case that was like anywhere near like this. We just were appalled that this lieutenant colonel was put in pretrial confinement for his speech. So he said that General Elford listing himself as a victim on the charge sheet and maintaining his authority as a convening authority of the court-martial was borderlining on illegal. Yeah, absolutely. If it were me, I would have had someone else do the referral. He went on to say that after reviewing my record, which it was one of the, quote, most exemplary, I can't talk today, records he had ever seen. He pointed out that the charge sheet took comments that I made out of context. Absolutely. You can watch the videos yourself. I think almost all of the videos are still on social media. He talks about in his book how he didn't delete any of them, and he's kept them up for posterity. He also had something to say about my leaked investigation. So his the investigation that was done right after he was removed out of battalion command was leaked to Task and Purpose. Also, it include his medical records, which is a huge no-no. That was it's a Privacy Act violation. And he said that the leaked documents were very disturbing. Quote, it's unfair, it's illegal, and it needs to be investigated. And it creates a specter of unlawful command influence. So unlawful command influence is when you have a more senior commander influencing lower commanders, or sometimes having like an inelastic disposition, which means you're just going to punish all cases the same and not have an individualized specific inquiry. And so unlawful command influence is a thing that can taint cases and actually get them overturned on appeal or not brought at all. So he said he ended up accepting my guilty pleas, but instead of fining me $30,000 as requested by the prosecution, which a fine in this type of case is, I don't even understand why they would ask for a fine. Generally, I've only asked for fines in theft cases, which seems appropriate, like theft or fraud cases, appropriate to have a fine since there's a pecuniary loss to the government. But he only fined me $5,000 and asked for the command to issue me a letter of reprimand. And so it's, like I said, a very interesting book. I think it's worth your time if you were to read it. And I think it comes at like a very opportune time. I plan to make this video all along on this date, but it just kind of worked out. So there was the first cabinet meeting that Trump held with his cabinet happened today. And then there were some questions by the press at that cabinet meeting. So I'm going to pull up, let me find it, that cabinet meeting. And specifically, very timely, there was a question about accountability for the Afghanistan withdrawal. And so let me share that screen.
Afghanistan, about Botched withdrawal. Have all the generals or command staff that were involved with the withdrawal been fired or relieved of duty?
Well, that's a great idea. It's fire.
I'm just going to pause that real quick. So that's something Trump said on the campaign trail, that he said that the generals that were involved in the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, he expected their resignation to be on his desk by noon on the day he was sworn in. That didn't happen, but here's the rest of the clip.
I'm not going to tell this man what to do, but I will say that if I had his place, I'd fire every single one of them. It's a good question.
Well, it's a question we've thought a lot about. We're doing a complete review of every single aspect of what happened with the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan, and plan to have full accountability. It's one of the first things we announced at the Defense Department for that reason, sir. Certainly, General Raisin Kane, who's on his way in, was not a part of that. Instead, he was a part of leading the effort against ISIS by untying the hands of war fighters, finishing the job properly, and bringing our troops home. So we're taking a very different view, obviously, than the previous administration, and there will be full accountability.
I don't see big promotions in that group.
All right, I'm just going to replay. So I will stop sharing that. Okay, and so this is accountability is kind of a long time coming, right? So it's been what, 3-4, almost 3.5 years since this happened. So maybe we'll get some accountability. But good news, Stuart Scheller, he did get kind of a happy ending in the end. So the new Trump administration, Pete Hegseth asked him to be a senior advisor to the DoD, undersecretary in personnel and readiness. So he has joined the Trump administration in that role. I believe based on a social media post that he posted, he's going to focus on bringing meritocracy back to the military and ensuring that they look at how we promote. And that's something that he talked about in his book, that a lot of times we don't promote the best. We promote the ones that have the longest time and grade. And he gave an example from his own career where he was told, like, hey, you were the best, at this rank in the battalion, you did the best, but I'm not going to rank you the best when it comes to ratings because you got 2 other officers who are closer to promotion than you. And so I'm going to rate them ahead of you to give them the bump up that they're going to need when they go to their promotion board. And when he tells that story, I think every single one of us in the military can tell a very similar story where we were told kind of the same thing, like, hey, I got a profile to protect. So, you're not up for the board for a while. So I'm going to give a top block, a top rating to this person who's closer to promotion versus you. And so I think it'll be really interesting that he's put in a position where maybe he can change that. He also talks about how promotion is really about just pleasing your boss, but not about actually the people you lead. And they should really have a say of who gets promoted, like who are future leaders, who are the good leaders, the people who are who work for them and who are under them. And so we'll see what happens, but is accountability coming? Maybe, hopefully, but it would be a long time coming. So we'll see. So more to follow on that. Thanks for joining me in this video, and we'll catch you in the next video. If you got any value out of the content, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm a new channel, so please help spread the word. I really appreciate your sharing this message out there. If you have any comments or questions or requests for additional content, please put them in the comments below. Thank you.